been talking about the rush within the media and elsewhere to pick a nominee early and end the primary process. So here's a fun exercise, or a scary one, depending on where you stand. Imagine if the Republican nomination process ended today. Well, ladies and gentlemen, here is what your current Republican frontrunner looks and sounds like. This is Rick Santorum in Ohio within the last 24 hours.
Free prenatal testing in every insurance policy in America. Why? Because it saves money in health care. Why? Because free prenatal testing ends up in more abortions and therefore less care that has to be done, because we cull the ranks of the disabled in our society. That too is part of Obamacare. Another hidden message as to what President Obama thinks of those who are less able than the elites who want to govern our country.
Back with me now is Caton Dawson, Newt Gingrich supporter and former South Carolina Republican chair. And joining him is Anthea Butler, University of Pennsylvania professor of religious studies and graduate chair of religion at Penn. Thank you both for being here. Anthea, I want to start with this language by Rick Santorum about the president's support of prenatal testing. Counting as a kind of position on the part of the president over and against the disabled. So getting information about one's pregnancy is necessarily, in Santorum's discourse here, going to lead to abortions, and therefore we should not have coverage for this sort of information. This feels to me like an extreme position.
Absolutely, Melissa. It's completely extreme. And you know, part of the problem is with Santorum is that he gets a little traction and he overreaches, okay? And what I mean by overreach is that he's going into his own theological beliefs about this as opposed to what you could think of as a moderate belief about it. So in other words, I mean, people do prenatal care all the time just to see how they are. This is not about whether you want an abortion or not. And I think it is really disingenuous for him to say that about President Obama's policy as though it means that this is another kind of death panel code word. That's what I think is going on.
Yeah, it did feel like the death panel code word. So Kate, in the last segment, you and I were talking about a long primary, you know, providing more opportunities for democracy, for people to actually get in there and vote. Well, right now, this is the guy that's leading. Will Republicans have hoped that this had wrapped up sooner if it ends up being Santorum?
You know, that's part of the process. I mean, whether you succeed or fail is part of your rhetoric, and certainly Rick's speaking to the base. He's speaking to the hard right, and we'll see how this works out. I mean, the Obamacare issue is alive and well, and that's one that's certainly been counterproductive to Governor Romney. Whether you start picking parts out of it, I mean, we saw a reversal with the Catholic Church. We've seen some of those things done already, but I mean, that's why we're having this process. The people who are really going to elect the next president of the United States are watching some of this, sort of.
Sure.
But we're picking our nominee, and the Republican base is going to pick it, and they're going to make that final choice, and we'll see how the rhetoric plays out. But I certainly don't, like you said, don't discount Newt Gingrich. Don't discount Governor Romney's machine. It's very well organized. Ron Paul brings a unique excitement to a Republican primary, so it's game on.
Right. I mean, there's certainly a tradition of pander and pivot, right? You pander to the base, and then you pivot. But the fact is, we now are in an age where, again, you know, anyone on television can give you a soundbite. You can see it again and again. So you can't just sort of say it in a quiet room of supporters. I do want to bring in I want to bring in a map, because this is what we do in Nerdland. And this is a map of the states controlled by Republicans that have new voter ID laws, considering or have adopted new voter ID laws. Now, we're making a case here, in part, that we need the people to decide. But very strongly connected to that is the ability to actually get to the polls and make a decision. If Republicans are going to make this claim that we want people to decide, then how do we square that with Republicans also passing these restrictive voting?
Exactly. I don't think they want some people to make it to the polls. Let's put it like this. So like college students, everybody, you know, you got to have your ID. You have to. This is the new poll tax, and this is what's problematic for those of us who are in the educational system, trying to tell our students how to be good civically engaged, right? But yet we have the Republican Party doing all this redistricting, doing all the laws, and then now all of a sudden you can't go and vote. A 90-year-old woman who works in the Tennessee State House can't go and work because she doesn't have the right ID for them. And so I don't think it is about Republicans wanting everybody to vote and wanting that base to be in. I think it's about you want to crosshatch everybody so that you can only get in the people you want to have vote as opposed to the people who actually might vote, and they might vote something differently than what you think.
All right, so Kate, how do we square like the nice, messy, powerful, Republican primary going on with this general election vote?
Let's unpack some of that. Okay. First, elections have consequences, and certainly redistricting is one of the crown jewels of the consequences. When you win a governor's mansion, you win the General Assemblies, and that's part of the process. I do think this is the most important right that we have as Americans, is the right to vote. I do. Yeah. And I have been there when people came up with no identification and said, I live at a street address and this is me. And there were processes for fail-safe ballots and all that. And so those arguments go on. The laws are all different. But it is very important. I mean, 130 million of what 340 million people vote. I mean, that's how many voted in the last presidential election. So certainly they're not all voting. Certainly we want to encourage people to vote. But there are laws and regulations, rules, and that's what we're trying to address. And that's, and I can only address what we did in the state of South Carolina, which has been it's been brought against us, but unanimously voted for it. It went through a committee process for 2 years and got negotiated out. But we want an ID. We want, you have to have one to go in a courtroom. We had to have one to come in to the station today.
Sure. But you don't have I mean, I think the very point about the value of voting, right? You don't actually have a fundamental right to come to 30 Rock. I mean,
that's called an invitation.
Yeah, that's right. You have to have an invitation to come to 30 Rock. But we do base kind of our fundamental democratic rights in the idea of having a voice. And so, I like this idea of, okay, democracy is messy. Sometimes we pick people who say things like prenatal care equals abortion. But if we pick them, right, then we do get the government in a certain way that we deserve, because elections have consequences. The problem is I don't want the consequence of an election to be the inability to vote in the next election, right? And that for me feels dangerous in a fundamental way to our democratic system.
Absolutely. And it's the whole history of this where people have been denied the right to vote, African Americans. And so when we see these kind of things happening, it makes me wonder, it's not just, people of color, it's other people too who don't get that right because you've cut everybody out. And if you say you're playing to a certain kind of base, if you're playing to, let's say, the white, lower middle class, regular worker, some of those people don't have the same kinds of things either. And so I'm wondering if the Republican Party isn't hurting themselves by doing what they are doing. So that's the first part. I want to circle back to Santorum just for a second.
Oh, sure. Let's come back to Santorum.
Let's come back to Santorum because Santorum said something else yesterday.
Yes. Well, when you're the front runner, this is your point. When you're the front runner, the light is on you.
And the problem with Santorum is he doesn't know how to pull on his blue-collar white guy background. What he's doing right now is playing theologian in chief. He accuses President Obama of not having the proper theology. At the same time, he sounded like a pre-Vatican I Catholic with what he wants.
But actually, since we circle back to Rick, let's listen to Rick real quick, and then I'm going to let you jump in here. Let's listen to Santorum talking about President Obama's religion yesterday.
This is what the president's agenda. It's not about you. It's not about you. It's not about your quality of life. It's not about your jobs. It's about some phony ideal, some phony theology. Oh, not a theology based on the Bible, different theology, but no less a theology.
Okay, so spotlight's on him, and he is doing theologian in chief. If it's not based in the Bible, what do you think is the claim that Santorum's making there?
This is a competition. And Rick's talking to a certain audience, and that's his choice. Certainly, we're not questioning the religion of the president. We're not. That's never gone on in the world I live in. But I'll tell you, when they're competing, they're trying to draw stark contrast. I do take exception to Rick's the background of where he's from. Rick always has talked about that. Yeah, he's talked about his heritage. He's proud of his family. He's proud of his brothers. But it's his campaign to run. It is. It's certainly Newt Gingrich's campaign to run, and nobody discount him because his background is deep and wide from a military family, and Governor
he's a Tulane grad.
He is, and there is a Republican conservative revolution going on. It's why this race is going to go on further. And being in first place, it sometimes is not the most enviable place to be in a Republican primary.
Well, let me ask you about this in part because we saw someone else who was really good at both the kind of ordinary folks' religion and the working class common man thing, and that was Sarah Palin. And when she first came, she was undoubtedly, as we have heard many times over the past couple of weeks, a game changer, right? And all of that scrutiny came to her, and early on, had the election been held within 3 weeks of announcing her nomination as vice president, the McCain-Palin ticket very well may have won. But the longer that spotlight stayed and the more we've gotten to know Sarah Palin, these very folks who liked her so much, we were just talking before the show, okay, that in South Carolina, her approval ratings are pretty darn low at the moment.
Well, they were. I mean, but when you go back and look at that, I was chairman of a party where John McCain was sort of the establishment's pick, much like Bob Dole. And there wasn't a lot of excitement. And I honor John McCain's service, and he was our nominee, and we worked for him, but we didn't win.
You did not.
No question. And Sarah Palin brought an enthusiasm and excitement where we needed 6,000 volunteers to do a victory program to make sure that the Republicans would win South Carolina. So at the end of the day, all that's history, and now there's a new day. I'm
going to have to stop us just for a bit here. Up next, we're going to take a special trip back in time as we dig into our vault in honor of President's Day. And as we go to break, I wanted to leave you with this image. It's a photo my friend Bernie took, and it really speaks to me.